Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another Wheel of Time book review. Today I will be talking about the third book in the main series, The Dragon Reborn. So I only have 11 more to go, plus the prequel. I guess I'm getting there. This book I liked it. I enjoyed it. I didn't like it quite as much as the second book, The Great Hunt, but I think I preferred it to the first book, Eye of the World. So if I had to rank the three books so far, I would say Eye of the World comes in third, Dragon Reborn second, and The Great Hunt first. And I will kind of explain my thoughts on that as I go along. And also, there will be some spoilers. I'm not going to go crazy detailed into everything that happens, but I will be revealing some important things with some of the characters and the main plot of the book. So, the first thing that's interesting about The Dragon Reborn is that I just figured the book would be all about Rand, the main character, as he is now the Dragon Reborn, but that is not the case. As a matter of fact, Rand is barely in this book, which in some ways works, in some ways doesn't, but I applaud Robert Jordan because I think this was a kind of a gutsy move and an interesting thing to do. Instead, The Dragon Reborn is really about all the characters following the Dragon Reborn on his quest to get this epic sword that he needs, which is kind of a simple plot again, but I did think it was less silly than the whole thing about chasing around the horn that everybody had easy access to. So I think the plot is slightly better, although I also think that not having Rand be in the book that much kind of makes the book feel like it's just passing time till we get to the next one. So I have mixed feelings about it, but what this does do is allow our other characters to get a spotlight shown on them, at least most of them. So I'm going to start out with Matt. I'm going to go through each character and give some brief thoughts. I think he's improved every book. He's the character to me that's come the furthest from the first book, Eye of the World, to this book, Dragon Reborn. Although I don't think he's the greatest or most interesting character ever, I think he's gotten much more interesting now that he's not linked to this dagger anymore. And he's definitely the comic relief. At least I find him to be kind of funny. I think it's interesting how he always kind of gets put in a situation he doesn't want to be in. He just wants to be left alone, but yet he keeps getting drawn into this epic journey in one way or another. Also, Tom shows up again. I kind of criticized his role in the second book, but I thought he was a much better support character to Matt in this third book. And although he's not my favorite character, he is a good contrast to Matt, and their adventures together are pretty entertaining. Perrin gets a ton of time in this book, maybe more than any other character, and I think he's interesting. I would like to see a little more with his connection with the wolves, but he does meet a new character named Fayle. I'm not really sure how to say that. I'm hoping it's Fayle. I think that sounds right. But so we might have kind of a love story brewing with Perrin, which would be interesting because, we've had a few of those hinted at in this series, but we haven't really had a full-on developed one. I could be way off on this, but that would be kind of an interesting way to go with Perrin, who I think is also an interesting character. In terms of some of the lead female characters, Nynaeve is still my favorite of the female characters. It seems like a lot of people don't really care for this character, and I get why. She can seem a little bit bossy, maybe a little bit too sassy at times. But what I like is that to me she's the most complex of the female characters, and I feel like her character could go in a lot of different directions. And although she doesn't get quite as much development as this book as she did in the last one, I'm curious to see where this character goes in the future. As far as Edwene goes, she gets more in this book as well, and all her Aes Sedai training is really good. Robert Jordan could have actually just made a whole book on this Aes Sedai training, and I would be in. Those were some of my favorite chapters of the book, once again. But I will say the rest of Edwene's character development, not really much. I thought there could have been a little bit more there, but the Aes Sedai training was great. Elaine continues to be a character I like but don't love, and that's mostly just because I feel like she's still underdeveloped, and I'm hoping in future books that will change. Right now, she just kind of feels like a sidekick character for Nynaeve and Egwene. One character that I'm really not liking at this point, this might be unpopular, but I have to give my honest feelings, is Moraine. I really liked her a lot in the first book. She was kind of just there in the second book. But I'm kind of getting a little bit annoyed with her character just being kind of cryptic for no reason. Like, people ask her questions, she never wants to give information, or she only gives little nuggets of information. And unless there's a great reason I haven't yet seen in which I'll kind of change my opinion, there's no reason for it. It seems like she's just cryptic to be cryptic, and it seems like just a convenient way for Robert Jordan to say, there's things I don't want you to know yet. And the character just seems to be there to be all powerful and kind of save the day, but she's not really adding much more to the plot, and she's actually frustrating because I don't feel like there's really that much of a reason for her to be, holding back as much as she is. Like I said, maybe my take will change, but right now she's just becoming kind of one of those annoying, I know everything characters, but I'm only going to tell you what you need to know. And I tend to side with other characters when they get frustrated with her. Then there's Lan, who's kind of still with her warder, and he's just there. Not much else to say. One thing I was disappointed in, I know there's still like 12 books to go, but very little of Min in this book, and I looked forward to seeing more of her. I will say once again we get the introduction of some more new characters. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I thought the new characters were interesting enough, and I look forward to seeing more of them in the future. Now, another great thing about this book is that although I think it still had its ups and downs pacing-wise, which I'll get into more here in a minute, I think the last 6 chapters were probably the best 6 in any of the first 3 books. I loved them. Once again, Robert Jordan understands how to build to an epic battle scene at the end, and I thought this was the best of the 3. It's amazing to me how characters are all split up and then they kind of come together at the ends of these books and everything seems to make sense. Which is going to lead me into my negatives of this book because I do have a few, and they're the reason why I prefer The Great Hunt to The Dragon Reborn. So while I still think the world building is amazing and the new characters are solid, there's still lulls in this book, but in this book it's not so much that they're at the beginning and the middle. They're kind of spread out. It's like there's 2 great chapters, then there's a lull. Then there's 2 more great chapters, or 3 great chapters. Then there's a chapter that's a lull. It just seems like there's times in this book and chapters in this book where nothing that interesting is happening. And while I don't mind the descriptions and it really engrosses you in the world, sometimes I think it does border on a little bit too much. I don't need to always know what every character is wearing in full description. And we go to a lot of new towns, and I don't always need a 2-page description on everything happening in the town. Like I said, I like this to a point, but I think it's bordering on maybe a little excessive. I get that's just kind of Robert Jordan's writing style, and that's probably not going to change, but it definitely slows down the pace a bit from time to time. There's times I think it really works and it's necessary, and then there's other times I feel like it's padded out just a bit much. I hope that makes sense. My bigger issue with this book, and the reason that I prefer the second one, is that there's very few villains in this book. There's a lot of minor villains that kind of just come and go. But what happened to the main villains? There's almost no Paddon Fane in this book. I think he's in the very first chapter. Then he just disappears. Lanfear, who was Selene in the second book. Now we know for sure that she's Lanfear. Barely in this book. Just in a few dreams or images here and there. Leandrin, great villain in the last book. Barely in this book. Now some of these characters do appear toward the end of the book. And, it ties all together well, but I need a little bit more character development out of villains throughout the story, not just for them to pop up. Like the main villain kind of just pops up at the end of this book out of nowhere without any build-up at all. Robert Jordan gets away with it because he's great at writing battle scenes, but I feel like it could be more effective if the main villains were developed in the plot a little bit more. Which leads me to my biggest complaint with the villains. The main villain in these first 3 books has gotten kind of boring at this point. It's just like one of those all evils that controls everything, and we don't really know anything more about it. Now, based on the ending of this book, where it seems like Rand defeated this villain, but now maybe he hasn't, maybe things are going to change up a little bit. And I kind of hope so, because like I said, while it still works, I think a little bit more needs to be done with the villains in this series as a whole. So overall, I still enjoyed this book a lot. I liked The Great Hunt a little bit more, but I did like Dragon Reborn a little bit more than Eye of the World. I still love the world building. I'm still hooked on this series because of that. Robert Jordan does a great job of world building. Maybe the best I've seen of any author. Of course, I haven't read that many, but He does a really, really great job of that. And there's so many storylines going on, so many interesting characters. So I'm still hooked right now, but I just want a little bit more. It seems like there's 100 questions and only about 2 answers at this point. But I realize there's still a lot of books to go. And I heard in book 4, which I have next here, called The Shadow Rising, which I will be starting on soon. I already have the book, that a lot more is explained and the story really picks up. So I'm looking forward to that. So like I said, I'm still in on the Dragon Reborn. If I had to rate all 3 books, I would say Eye of the World and Dragon Reborn are like 4 out of 5 books. Great Hunt was probably a 4.5 out of 5. And I'm hoping The Shadow Rising will be a 5 out of 5. But Robert Jordan has me hooked at this point. So I probably will take a short break before starting the next book. And then it's also a big increase in pages. It's like over 900. So it might be a while before my next Wheel of Time review, as sometimes I don't read tons and tons of chapters in a day either. It just depends on how engrossed I get in the book. But I will have a review of The Shadow Rising after I read it. As always, thanks for your support. I'm still enjoying the book series. If you have any comments or have read these books or are interested in reading them, you can let me know. Thanks.